There is no question the DJI O3 system is a major upgrade over the original FPV system. Many people are more than happy with the video performance, the RF link, and the overall quality of the DVR. However, there is now and again posts from people having problems that they don't fully understand with regards to its RF behavior around other systems. This is largely because people have assumed the O3 system uses exactly the same channels as the original DJI system. Today, though, I'm going to walk you through and explain why that is not the case, and I'm going to show you how the O3 system actually uses the 5.8 gig and 2.4 gigs band, and the things that you need to be aware of, especially when flying around other users. Now, I just want to say up front, if you do find this video useful, please do give it a like. There is a link to a chart that I'm going to show you in a moment in the description, and next to that there's also a link to my Patreon as well if you'd like to support the channel, but I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Anyway, let's get on with it and let's find out what I'm actually talking about. Okay, now before we start, I want to get a few things out of the way. There are a number of FPV bands out there, but the most popular is Raceband. Raceband is also used by HD0 as well, and the frequency allocation on Raceband and HD0 in its normal operating mode is exactly the same. The original DJI FPV system, though, did not use Raceband. It actually had its own allocation. It has 8 channels in 25 megabits a second, of which 7 are normal channels and 1 is what is called public, and 4 channels in 50 megabits a second, which again, 3 normal channels and 1 public. That public channel was the channel that the system actually booted up onto and transmitted a chunk of RF when it first kicked in, and then you should always move on to a different channel. Something you need to understand with the original FPV system was that it always boots onto that public channel 8. The goggles don't transmit until it picks up a signal from the VTX, and then once it locks on, it will then jump to your previously pre-selected channel, but the original system does give off a burst of RF on channel 8 when it first boots up and first connects. Now, with regards to O3, things are quite different, as I will show you in a moment. When I'm talking about O3 today, I'm also talking about the DJI Avata as well, because O3 and the Avata mirror their behavior. Also, you need to note that the O3 system behaves differently with and without the ham file, and I will explain that a little bit more as we move through the video. So to start, at the top of the chart, you'll see we have our frequency band. Now in large, we have 5.7, 5.8 and 5.900 with the intermediate frequencies shown between. Next down, we have Raceband. Now this is the usual 1 to 8 channels on Raceband. You can see the number as well as the frequency for the channels shown below. Next, we have HD0. Again, this mirrors Raceband because it uses exactly the same channel allocation when in normal mode. Yes, they have just added low band and I haven't currently got that on this chart at the moment. However, the normal operating mode directly mirrors Raceband. Below this, we have the DJI V1 FPV system. We have 25 megabits mode and 50 megabits mode. In 25, the V1 system has 8 channels available, 7 standard channels and 1 public. You'll note that the channel 8 public channel is not the last channel on the band. You just look, number 8 is actually on 5839. This is the standard public channel that the system will boot into. This is not a channel you should ever use. It is only ever really to allow people to power up and move on to another channel. However, it is worth noting the original system, every time you boot, will always output a blast of RF on channel 8, and that's why you should never use it as a standard channel. Moving down to 50 megabits mode on the V1 system. Now, this has 4 channels, of which 3 are 50 megabits channels, channels 1, channels 2, and channel 3. And then we have the public channel, which mirrors the same frequency as channel 8 when in 25 megabits mode. You can see here, the band allocation in 50 megabits mode is wider. It's actually using a 40 megahertz carrier, apart from on channel 8, which is the public channel. Now, with regards to the Avatar HD system, you'll see it's actually listed next to the V1 DJI system, and that is because it uses exactly the same channel allocation. The low bandwidth mode is the same as the DJI 25 megabits, and the high bandwidth mode is the same as the 50. Avatar have just released a new racing mode, which does use the raceband channels, which mirrors raceband and HD0. However, that is only in that specific mode, and Avatar HD in its normal mode mirrors the V1 system, and all of the same quirks apply. Next, moving on to O3. Now, this is slightly complicated, and before I get into it, I need to get a few things out of the way. The O3 system consists of three parts. We have the goggles, the ear unit, and if you're using it, the DJI remote. The DJI goggles and ear unit and remote are all capable of dual band. They work on both 2.4 and 5 gigs, but not all parts of the link use both of those bands. For instance, the O3 ear unit can transmit video only on the 5 gigs band. In FCC, it will transmit it in 5.8, and in CE, it will transmit it on both 5.19 gigs or 5.8. The video from the O3 ear unit is only on the 5 gigs band. The O3 ear unit, though, can receive telemetry link from the goggles and the RC on both 5 gigs and 2.4 gigs, and the easiest way to understand this is the O3 ear unit can only transmit on the 5 gigs band but can receive on the 2.4 and 5 gigs band. With regards to the DJI goggles, whether it be the Goggles 2, Integra or the V2s, they can transmit and receive on both 2.4 and 5 gigs. The goggles will obviously only receive video on 5 gigs because that's all the ear unit can send it on, but the goggles themselves will transmit back to that ear unit in either 5 gigs or 2.4 gigs. The situation is the same for the DJI FPV Remote 2 as well. It can transmit on both 2.4 and 5 gigs and regularly jumps between those two bands. Something else to note is the O3 system behaves differently with and without the ham file. Without the ham file is how you get it from the factory, regardless of if it's in FCC or CE mode, and with the ham file obviously gives you additional channels, but it also changes the frequency of those channels, and I'll walk you through that now in the chart. Taking a look at O3 in auto mode first of all. As I've said, the ear unit will only transmit on the 5 gigs band. That 5 gigs band is between 5725 and 5850. The DJI O3 system in auto will not transmit outside of that frequency allocation. That is the area that DJI have allowed the system to work within. As I've said, the RC and the goggles telemetry can jump down to 2.4 gigs, and that 2.4 gigs band is actually shown down here at the bottom of the chart. However, when they are on 5 gigs, they will all only operate in the area of 5725 to 5850. Now, I do have a dedicated video on the RF behavior of O3, and I'm not going to go into it too deeply here today. However, what I will say is this: you should assume that whole 5725 to 5850 is congested when using O3. It puts different parts of the system on different parts of the band. It has the video, which is a static carrier that can hop in the event of interference. It has the telemetry from the goggles and the remote signal if using it as well. They, though, are not on the same frequency channel used as the video carrier, and as such, they pretty much take up that whole area on that bandwidth shown. Now, when using O3 in auto, it is dynamic in the sense of it will hop around the band, but it will only hop within that bandwidth shown. And this is somewhat of a limitation on how many systems you're actually able to use at the same time in auto. And in my opinion, you're going to probably start seeing problems using any more than 2 or 3. Next, we're going to look down at the manual channel mode. Now, O3 has a number of different bandwidths available. It has a 10 megs mode, a 20 megs mode, and a 40 megs mode. The 10 megs mode is roughly 14 megabits a second. The 20 megahertz mode is the 25 megabits a second, and the 40 megahertz mode is the 50 megabits a second. Now, regardless of if you get the goggles in the CE or FCC, you will have the same channel allocation available, which is 3 channels in 10 and 20 MHz mode and 1 channel in 40 MHz mode. In this setup, you will see that channel 1 is on 5768, channel 2 is on 5804, and channel 3 is on 5839. That is on the 10 and 20 MHz mode. When we go to the 40 MHz mode, you have 1 channel, which is on 5794. Now, something to note here that is important, and this will come up again later on, is with regards to channel 3 when using 10 and 20 MHz mode. You'll note that this is exactly the same frequency as channel 8 on the Avatar HD system and the original DJI system. That is the public channel, and as a result of that, if you're using the O3 system on channel 3, you are very susceptible to interference from other users powering on either the Avatar system or the original DJI system when they boot on channel 8. And really, if you're flying with any other users, channel 3 in this normal mode should be avoided. Next, moving down to the next level. Now, this is the O3 system when using it with the ham file. Now, the first thing to note is the channels are not the same. Whilst the ham file does give you more channels, which is 7 in 10 and 20 MHz mode and 3 in 40 MHz mode, they are not the same. Channel 1, as it comes from the factory without the ham file, is not the same as channel 1 with the ham file. And as a result of that, you do need to keep these two separate and understand the effect that they may have on each other and other systems. So again, to confirm, when using the O3 system with the ham file, the channel allocation is as following. Channel 1 is on 5669, channel 2, 5705, channel 3, 5768, channel 4, 5804, channel 5, 5839, channel 6, 5876, and channel 7, 5912. The same issue stands, as I mentioned just now, with regards to channel 5 on this mode as it is on channel 3 on the standard mode, and that is channel 5 with the ham file overlaps channel 8 on the original DJI FPV system and the public channel on Avatar, and again will be susceptible to all of the same issues of being affected by people powering on those other systems. When using the O3 system with the ham file in 40 MHz mode or 50 megabits, you'll see that channel 1 is now 5677, channel 2 is 5794, and channel 3 is 5902. The nice thing about this is in 40 MHz mode or 50 megabits, those 3 channels are completely out the way of the others, and they should offer you good performance when flying around other users. Now, below this on the chart, you will see a few other things shown. We have the Wi-Fi channel allocation. I'm not going to go into that in too much depth here, but it is listed there. At the bottom, we have the 2.4 gigs band that the O3 system will use with the goggles and remote, just to give you an idea of the frequency allocation of that. And there's one last thing shown, which is this here, which is Note 1, which is 4 carriers within that larger band that I showed you the O3 system operates in auto. These carriers are not telemetry carriers from the goggles, they're telemetry carriers from the air unit. They are very fast pulsing carriers of about a 10 megahertz bandwidth that always hop between these 4 frequencies. This happens regardless of if you're in auto or manual, and they are alongside the carriers for the RC control link, the carriers for the video, and the goggles. Now, we don't really fully understand what they are other than being telemetry carriers from the air unit. They're not actually transmitted from the remote or the goggles, but I wanted to list them separately because they are something you can observe. They quite nicely show, as I mentioned earlier, that whole area between 5725 and 5850 is very congested when using the O3 system in manual or auto mode, especially though when in auto, where it pretty much takes up that whole bandwidth. Now, there is one last thing I want to mention on O3 with regards to its behavior of its carriers when using auto or manual. In auto, O3 will use that band, as I said, between 5725 and 5850 for the video and the telemetry, but it may decide to move that telemetry down to 2.4 gigs if it wants. If it does move it down to 2.4 gigs, that area I just mentioned is less congested, but it still has a lot going on with those carriers I show at the bottom of the chart. The way O3 works though in auto mode is that it does tend to keep everything separate. So for instance, the video carrier will be on one part of that band, the goggles telemetry will be on another, and those 4 carriers will be on another. In manual mode though, O3 does do something to tidy the band up a bit. And what it actually does is move the goggles telemetry carriers onto the same frequency band as the video. So instead of having the video on a 40 megs carrier in one part of the band and the goggles on another, it actually combines them onto the same frequency. That means it should offer less interference, but it is worth me mentioning, even when it does that, you still have those 4 carriers shown at the bottom transmitting on those frequencies. Now, the benefit of it combining all of the carriers other than those ones at the bottom onto the same piece of band the video is using is that it should help prevent it interfering with other systems and also getting interfered with on other systems as well. One last point I also need to make between auto and manual is when you're using the manual channels, the system will always be in 5.8 gigs. If you select, say, manual channel 1, it will put the video carrier on channel 1, the goggles telemetry on channel 1, and the remote signal if using it on channel 1 as well. And at no point will the goggles or remote disappear off to 2.4 gigs. There is no option in the O3 system to force it to stay on 5 gigs, but you can do it simply by using the manual channel mode. So for instance, if you were to build a quad and you didn't want to bother putting dual band antennas on, you could get around this and force the system to stay in 5 gigs simply by using manual channel mode. Now, this obviously leads us back to auto mode, where it will use both 2.4 and 5.8 gigs for the remote and telemetry. With regards to what it does and why it does it, it is simply due to congestion on the band. It will literally hop between 2.4 and 5 gigs as it sees fit. The system will predominantly try to stay on 5 gigs, but if there is anything at all it is unhappy about, it will toss the goggles and the remote down onto 2.4 gigs if it feels it needs to, and it will then, as time goes on, constantly bounce back and forth between the two. But always remember, video will always be on 5 gigs band regardless of what's happening. Now, as you've seen, O3 is rather complicated with regards to its band usage. Now, I will summarize this as simply as I can in a minute, but there are a few things I just want to touch a bit more on. I mentioned earlier about 5.19 gigs. Just to confirm on that, the O3 system, in my experience and my testing, will only go on to 5.19 gigs in CE mode. It will not do it in FCC mode. If you use the ham file, it will never go on to 5.19 gigs. It only happens if you have a stock CE system. It is the video carrier that goes down to 5.19 gigs. The telemetry either stays on 5.8 or goes down to 2.4 like it's capable of. This was introduced with the new firmware on the goggles too that also added support for the Caddx Vista and the DJI Air unit. The original release firmware for the O3 system, this does not happen. With regards to FCC CE and the ham file, you should think of these as 3 separate regions. FCC and CE basically use the same channel allocation. The only difference is the RF power output. The ham file gives you an expanded range of channels, but it also moves those channels on the band as well, hence the 2 different areas on the chart. The thing to understand between ham and FCC CE is class it as just a different region setting, not a different setting that gives lots of different options. CE and FCC as one region just with different RF powers, ham file with the same power or a little bit more as FCC and a different channel allocation. The real thing to watch, as I mentioned, is that channel 5 on the ham file mode or channel 3 on the FCC CE mode when using it with other systems. It overlaps with channel 8 on the original DJI system, and as I mentioned, this original system does blast RF on power output and it could cause you a problem. So to summarize this as easily as I can, O3 is bloody complicated. As it comes from the factory, regardless of FCC or CE, you will get 3 channels in 10 and 20 MHz mode, 1 channel in 40 MHz mode. Those channels are not the same channels as you have with the ham file hack, which will give you 7 channels in 10 and 20 MHz mode and 3 channels in 40 MHz mode. In ham file mode, the channel 5. In normal mode, the channel 3 will overlap with the public channel 8 on the original DJI FPV system and should be avoided at all times. When using it in auto mode, it'll pretty much use up the whole area of 5725 to 5850. It'll toss the carriers all over that piece of bandwidth. The RC and control link from the goggles can go on to 2.4 gigs, but the video will always be on 5 gigs. When flying with others, you really should avoid auto and select manual channels, avoiding, as I've already said, channel 5 with the hack or channel 3 as standard. As I mentioned, all of this also applies to the Avata as well, and it is exactly the same. The real benefit to using the DJI 3 system on manual mode compared to auto is that it does also reduce its overall band usage. It moves the video, telemetry and RC carriers onto the same frequency, and in manual mode it will always be on 5 gigs. The RC or the goggles will never go down to 2.4 gigs in manual. It'll only ever do that when in auto. So I hope that gives you a better understanding of O3's behavior. If it does, please do give this video a like, and if you're new here, please don't forget to subscribe. As I've said, there is a link to that chart in the description, and there's also a link in the description to my Patreon as well. If you'd like to support us to allow us to keep making content like this in the future, please do consider checking it out. I want to say a massive thank you to all of my patrons. I would not have been able to buy the O3 system, been able to do all of this testing without their support, and if you'd like to support us to allow us to keep doing that in the future as well, please do consider checking it out. Anyway, that's it from me on this one. Please do let me know what you think in the comments. Any questions, put them in there as well. Stay safe. I'll speak to you soon.